This is Defiance Daily, dispatches for the Defiant. I am your host, Miles Taylor, and we begin tonight with several developments that raise new questions about how the federal government is operating during a moment of growing crisis, from disaster response here at home to an expanding war overseas. In the Midwest, communities devastated by a wave of deadly tornadoes are now learning that federal responders may have been sent into the field without one of the key tools normally used to locate survivors, and lives hung in the balance. In a major win for the rule of law, meanwhile, in Washington, a federal judge has blocked a Justice Department investigation targeting the chairman of the Federal Reserve, ruling that the probe appears to have been launched to pressure the central bank over interest rates. And overseas, the war with Iran continues to widen, with new troop deployments and the deaths of 6 U.S. service members during military operations taking place in the skies over nearby Iraq. With us today is Defense Department correspondent and former CNN Pentagon reporter Barbara Starr to break down the latest with the war. This is Defiance Daily, dispatches for the Defiant. First tonight, folks, we turn to the Midwest, where communities are still assessing the damage after a powerful storm produced dozens of tornadoes stretching from Texas all the way to Michigan. At least 11 people have been killed, neighborhoods have been completely flattened, and search and rescue crews have been racing still to locate survivors in the wreckage. But as those crews deployed, new reporting suggests something critical was missing from the federal disaster response. A FEMA-supported system that is used to map tornado damage in real time and track those tornadoes once they have touched down on the ground was not available when the storms struck. And now questions are mounting about why the Trump administration left frontline defenders unprepared to do what they're expected to do what they always do in these situations. And according to an exclusive CNN investigation, when search and rescue crews deployed to those hardest hit areas, they were missing this very important tool. The data from this tool allows responders to quickly identify which neighborhoods took the hardest hit and then prioritize rescue operations towards those neighborhoods. But when the storms struck last weekend, that system, it wasn't available. And according to sources familiar with the situation, FEMA's relatively tiny $200,000 contract with the company that provides that tornado tracking data expired in February, and the contract had not been renewed. Why? Well, the renewal request is currently stuck inside the Department of Homeland Security, stuck inside a spending process overseen by the Secretary of Homeland Security, Kristi Noem herself. Under new spending controls implemented by the Homeland Security Secretary in the second Trump administration, any FEMA expense over $100,000 now requires her personal approval, a process that has left thousands of agency spending requests waiting for sign-off. That includes this tornado tracking contract. So when the storms hit, state and local responders suddenly lost access to the mapping data that they normally rely on. One official described the situation bluntly. Rescuers, they said, were, quote, flying blind. Instead of receiving immediate digital mapping showing where the tornado struck hardest, crews had to just drive through the damaged neighborhoods, rely on local news reports, and piece together storm paths manually. This resulted in a loss of valuable time because when the tornadoes strike overnight, when people are asleep in their homes, those first hours make an enormous difference about whether survivors will be found while they are still survivors. FEMA officials say the problem could have been avoided. According to sources familiar with internal discussions, FEMA employees requested renewal of the contract as early as January, but the request stalled during DHS spending reviews. The issue is unfolding amid broader disruptions inside of FEMA. During last month's partial shutdown at the Department of Homeland Security, Kristi Noem directed FEMA staff to scale back operations to, quote, bare minimum life-saving work. But an internal email obtained by reporters listed a few exceptions that show those guidelines were applied loosely. Those exceptions including work related to President Trump's State of the Union address, immediate winter storm response, planning for the World Cup and the Olympics, and nuclear security activities. Career officials say the directive caused total confusion across the agency. Some offices stopped work entirely on disaster preparedness and recovery programs. And 7 FEMA officials told CNN the disruptions left parts of the agency stalled during one of the most critical preparation periods of the year, when FEMA is normally preparing for tornado outbreaks, summer hurricane season, and the growing wildfire risks. One senior FEMA official described the situation as, quote, the most appalling experience of their career. And another said bluntly, we are sitting around with nothing to do. Meanwhile, tornadoes continued to rip through Illinois as recently as Wednesday, and government officials are concerned that recent interactions with the federal government will result in withholding of funding to respond. CBS Chicago has the story.
I want to show you another example of the devastation from yesterday's powerful storms. This is all that's left of Toland's Landscape and Garden Center in Kankakee. And Erica, last night we were wondering what we would see at first light, and the pictures, as Albert said, are just almost, in some cases, unreal.
The sun comes up and we see that devastation.
Right.
And now, as families work to rebuild their lives, questions over whether the federal government will help out or not will likely be a focal point down the road.
Political reporter Chris Ty here now with why it's proven trickier for victims of disaster funding in Illinois, especially lately.
Yeah, especially lately, guys. And unfortunately, politics has popped its head into this conversation. And you need to look no further than places like Palatine, Romeoville, Sugar Grove, who were hammered with those storms. Remember last August to be specific, soaking rain, 70-mile-an-hour winds, you may recall, ravaged parts of our area. While there were no tornadoes as a result of this, Boone County, Cook, Kane, McHenry, and Will counties saw flooding, wind, and hail damage, blocked roads, extensive power outages. Well, FEMA rejected the governor's request for assistance. State aid had to suffice. Governor Pritzker said the president was playing politics here. Today, Congresswoman Robin Kelly, who represents Kankakee, said she is going to fight for FEMA money here.
People have died. People's homes have been torn apart. Businesses have been torn apart. We should not look at Democrat or Republican. These are people that live here, and they need to release the money. And there should not be retaliatory efforts. That would be absolutely ridiculous.
But DHS doesn't seem to be withholding any contracts or money that would prevent the department from deporting people. Yesterday in South Burlington, Vermont, hundreds of residents surrounded a home as ICE agents attempted to carry out arrests, resulting in an intense day of standoffs between the public and ICE. As protesters formed a human chain around the property, federal agents eventually deployed tear gas and flashbangs and detained several demonstrators. But for many in that community, the message was clear. If the federal government isn't going to protect people, residents are prepared to stand up for one another. Vermont Public provides us with a breakdown of yesterday's scene.
Federal immigration agents detained 3 people from a South Burlington house on Wednesday after a tense day-long standoff and a series of clashes between police and activists outside. The incident began Wednesday morning when ICE agents attempted to arrest a man they thought was David Daniel Corona Sanchez, a 24-year-old undocumented man from Mexico. That attempted arrest led to a multi-car accident on Dorset Street. Hundreds of protesters gathered outside the house as immigration authorities waited for more than 9 hours for a criminal warrant to enter the house. At one point, people helped the child leave the house and drove the child away. Later, Vermont State Police removed people who were blocking the front entrance, and immigration authorities entered the house and removed 3 people from inside. None of the people taken into custody were Corona Sanchez, federal prosecutors said on Thursday morning. Activists attempted to impede law enforcement from leaving the scene, and federal immigration authorities deployed flashbangs and tear gas to disperse the crowd. State police say 3 people have been cited on disorderly conduct charges.
I'm going to bring into the conversation my Defiance.org co-founder, Xander Schultz. Xander, I got to say, this has been something we have warned about for years when it comes to FEMA. Folks have probably heard me say before, the very first thing I disclosed when I came forward against Trump in 2020 was my worry that if he was reelected to a second term, he would politicize FEMA, because so often in private he tried to get us to not disperse money to Democratic blue states, but to disperse money to red states and to inherently politicize the agency. Now that is clearly happening. It's happening across the department. He's not even helping first responders in blue states. He's leaving them without critical tools, yet going and administrating his deportation agenda and helping states that are in trouble in red areas of the country.
Yeah, we're kind of seeing the why behind some of the investments that they hollowed out, right? Why USAID? Because it's a type of diplomacy that's far, far cheaper than conflict. Why climate tech investments in energy infrastructure? Because being reliant on Russia in the Middle East and the stability there, including stability we disrupt, leaves us vulnerable. Why FEMA budget? Because, destruction cleanup is more expensive than prevention. It's so ironic that we are dealing with the consequences of them cutting a six-figure budget while they're spending 1.2 billion on a detention center in Arizona, or in El Paso, and so it just shows like how kind of bankrupt some of the early Doge narrative was in so many ways. I'll say also, a different topic. It's fucking cool seeing people in Vermont forming a human chain. That's kind of what we were hoping to see out of Americans, and it's cool neighbors all over America kind of taking Minneapolis's lead and running with it, knowing that it's on them to protect each other.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. I mean, it does show the solidarity out there. I also have to say, Xander, on the first story about the tornadoes, this is really galling to me. I remember at the start of the administration when stories came out about how Kristi Noem and Corey Lewandowski had imposed these contract controls, and it wasn't just FEMA. It was other agencies where above certain dollar amounts, they had to personally approve the contracts. Now, as an American taxpayer, if you're out there listening to this, you would think, well, maybe they should be doing that. Maybe they should be going contract by contract to do cost cutting. Okay, I want to give you a sense of magnitude. The Department of Homeland Security has 250,000 employees. It has a $60 billion budget with a B. If you are approving every contract over $100,000, your entire full-time job could be just sitting in the office going through those folders, and you would not get through it. And I'm going to tell you, having run that front office, having run the office of the secretary, it is not physically possible to approve that many contracts, nor is it even possible to set that bar higher at $1 million and still give those contracts adequate review amidst all of the crises that you would expect the Secretary of Homeland Security to be busy managing. That's why you don't do it. That's why in a large organization you have deputies and lieutenants and people you delegate to. You don't bring all of those personal decisions. We've all had micromanager bosses. I want you to think about this as one of the worst micromanaging decisions we've seen in Washington, D.C. Micromanaging that led to massive macro consequences. And I had this conversation with my wife because we met at DHS. We like to say we found love in a hopeless place. And she remembers very well exactly what those folders looked like. There were these green folders that if there was a contract, and in our case, it was pretty large contracts that had to be escalated to the secretary for review. When it came up to the front, those things would stack pretty high. And you would see that pile and it would say hours of work. You knew it wasn't doable even at that level. So this is extraordinary dereliction that at the department they said anything over $100,000 had to be approved. I was saying last year, people would die because of this. And guess what? People's lives were just put on the line because somewhere in some stupid folder, somewhere in the office of the secretary, buried under many other folders, was a contract that had life and death implications. And Xander, I would say today the question is it the only one? And undoubtedly, it is not. There are other things sitting in a pile somewhere because they set these arbitrary rules that are putting people in this country at risk.
How do you think, this is one of those examples. This is one of those examples. People are,
Well, we lost your audio. We can't hear you very well.
Oh, really?
There you go. Now we got you.
Okay. I was going to say this is a little bit politically utilitarian, but this is one of those examples where people are acutely feeling the pain of Trump and his administration's either incompetence or evilness, for lack of a better term. How do we make sure our friends, that are on the ground there, that are experiencing this, that are being hurt by this, have the attribution correct here and understand that this isn't business as usual. This didn't have to happen. This was because of administrative decisions to deprioritize their safety.
Yeah. Well, look, I think that CNN investigative report was an important one. I think it was important that they looked into how it got to this point. People might not have asked the questions that would have led to this. And were it not for enterprising reporters who remembered the fact that they had imposed these cost controls early in the administration. But I think the other piece of it, Xander, is also making sure that going forward, there is an effort in places where there's some leverage, Capitol Hill, the appropriations committees, and otherwise, to attach some conditions here to prevent things like this from happening in the future. So certainly a catastrophic situation. And like I said, you got to wonder what else is in those files that hasn't been reviewed that could potentially affect American lives. So it's scary stuff. I'm going to take us, my friend, into our next story here, which is that a federal judge has now dealt a major blow to a Justice Department investigation targeting the Federal Reserve Chairman Jerome Powell. Chief Judge James Boasberg of the U.S. District Court in Washington has quashed 2 grand jury subpoenas sent to the Federal Reserve as part of a criminal probe launched by the Office of the U.S. Attorney Jeanine Pirro, Trump's hand-picked attorney in Washington, D.C. In a sharply worded ruling, the judge said the subpoenas were not part of a legitimate criminal investigation, but instead appeared to be an attempt to pressure Powell over interest rates. Judge Boasberg wrote that there was, quote, abundant evidence that the subpoenas were meant to harass Powell and push him to either lower interest rates to satisfy the president or resign and allow a replacement more aligned with the White House. The judge also said prosecutors had failed to show any evidence that Powell committed a crime. Instead, he wrote, the only apparent offense was, quote, displeasing the president. That investigation stems allegedly from Jerome Powell's testimony before the Senate Banking Committee last year about a costly renovation project at the Federal Reserve's headquarters. But the broader conflict between Powell and the White House centers on interest rates. President Trump has repeatedly attacked Powell for refusing to slash rates quickly. In his ruling, the judge even cited dozens of public statements from the president pressuring Jerome Powell to lower interest rates. Not long after the decision became public, U.S. Attorney Jeanine Pirro held a press conference where she lashed out at the judge's ruling, calling the decision the work of an activist judge, and continuing to crash out before ending the conference.
The process should have been allowed to run its course, and it wasn't. And shame on them. Oh, cut it out. Do you know how many convictions we've got? Cut it out. You're in one lane. We have cleaned up this city. Yeah, historic, really? I'll tell you what's historic. What's historic is that I prosecute everything other than 10% of the cases, where the United States attorney before me didn't prosecute 67% of the cases. That's what's historic. I'm willing to take a not guilty. I'm willing to take a no true bill, because I'll take all the crimes and put them in. Thank you.
Thank you. That's all the time we have.
Pirro has stated the Justice Department will appeal, but the ruling has also drawn criticism from members of the president's own party. Republican Senator Tom Tillis, who sits on the Senate Banking Committee, said the decision confirms the investigation is weak and frivolous and warned the Justice Department should drop the case rather than continue the fight in court. The dispute is also complicating the White House's plan to replace Jerome Powell when his term at the Federal Reserve as the chair ends in May. Trump has nominated former Fed Governor Kevin Warsh to succeed him, but Tillis has warned he will block confirmation of any Fed nominee until the Justice Department shuts down the investigation into Powell. Even if Powell is eventually replaced as chair, the president's influence over interest rates is supposed to remain limited. Rate decisions are set by the Federal Open Market Committee, a 12-member body that includes regional bank presidents the White House cannot appoint or remove, at least not under the law, and Powell could remain on the Fed's board through 2028, even after stepping down as chair. For now, though, the judge's ruling marks a significant rebuke to the Justice Department and raises new questions about whether the criminal investigation was ever about a crime at all. I want to bring Xander back into the conversation. Xander, I think it's evident it was never about a crime, and Jerome Powell did something that was very brave and very unexpected for a older gentleman who works in finance who otherwise seems like a sort of vanilla Washington character, which is that as soon as he found out that the Federal Reserve was being subpoenaed and criminally investigated, and he was personally, On a Sunday night, he filmed a video. He went out there and he said, this is inappropriate. This is unethical. This is not how the system should work. The president's trying to threaten and intimidate us, and I won't cave. I thought that was one of the most extraordinary moments of the past year, which is probably saying something.
Are you sure he's not an activist and a radical? Because it appears that everyone who ever comes down against this administration for whatever justifiable reason, America is filled with activists in a way that I didn't know before this administration took power. It's absurd. It's so funny, like the way Jeanine Pirro is acting in that. It reminds me of when you see those images in North Korea of Kim Jong-un and his lieutenant. He says something, his lieutenants stand up and they're clapping and applauding in like this insane, unnatural way to compete to show they are the most loyal. I feel like what we're seeing when we see these press conferences with Hegseth or Pirro or, the other kind of lieutenants here, Bondi, is almost a performance for Trump. It's a loyalty performance for Trump in his brand and sometimes wearing his shoes to show that they are unflappable and will not let reality get in the way of their loyalty and dedication to him. It's so disturbing in so many ways. That article you wrote about Trump's shoes is in my head as I'm seeing this. It's almost like the room and who they're speaking to is irrelevant. The audience is Trump himself, and every press conference is a loyalty test.
Yeah, and what's scary about this is even though the law creates this cocoon of independence around the Fed, if the president wanted to, he could take measures to an extreme, like he was trying to, and just remove people. Now, remember, the courts also ruled that his effort to do that with Lisa Cook, who's on that Fed board, was illegitimate, that he didn't have cause to fire her. But that's still something that the administration is pursuing. Is okay. Well, can they just come up with cause for people they don't like on the Fed board, fire everyone, replace them, announce an emergency, take over the Fed? This isn't some abstract thing. People need to remember we see this in authoritarian countries, and it has to do directly with your livelihood. The president wants the ability to decide how much money gets pumped into the system. Why? If you don't know anything about economics, I explained this in a previous conversation that we had, but I want you to think of the Federal Reserve as a helicopter that can be filled with money. All right, it's the place the government might be able to print money if they want to print money. And what happens in authoritarian regimes is they take over the central bank and they send that helicopter full of money all over the country, and they throw it out of the helicopter. Okay, and imagine what would happen at your house if a helicopter full of money dropped cash out. Wow, you would take it, you would feel richer. What would you go do? You'd take those $100 bills that landed on your house and you'd walk out in the community and you would start to spend it. But if that happened at everyone's house and cash was distributed everywhere, everyone would have more $100 bills, which means they would go spend it at stores and the price of things would go up because each $100 bill would be worth less because everyone would have the paper. It would be just like in Monopoly. If you got a stack of cash and everyone else did, each 100 is going to be worth less money. That's called inflation. That is called inflation. That's what happens when dictators take over central banks, is they print money because in the short term, it makes people love them. It makes them feel richer.
Right.
But in the long term, it creates hyperinflation and ruins economies. It destroys people's savings accounts. And we've seen all Donald Trump cares about is short-term economic thinking. He wants the Federal Reserve to lower interest rates. That's just a fancy way of saying make money cheaper, print more of it, put it out there into the world. That's bad for your savings account. It makes it literally worth less. And if Donald Trump had that control and took extreme action, it could hypothetically launch the U.S. into a total economic death spiral.
Totally. I don't even know if he's thinking short-term economically. It's like just marketing. He's just thinking about marketing all the time. He's going to put tariffs in place that hurt our farmers, but then he's going to give them a check and they're going to attribute that check to him. Mostly people aren't buying it anymore, but it's a kind of party trick that he's done even in his first administration with some of the COVID money where he directly signed the checks and made sure his name was on it. And then, when Biden took over, he went to direct deposits that didn't have his name on it and whatnot. He just thinks about everything through the lens of this marketing that has to your point, no connection to our kind of long-term well-being as a nation. And there's so many historical examples of this. Most recently, I think Erdogan in like 2018 in Turkey did something similar to what Trump's trying to pull off here. And I think it's the lira, I'm forgetting what the Turkish currency is, experienced 75% inflation within like an 18-month or 24-month window.
Yeah, this isn't just like autocrats from the early 20th century. I mean, people who are taking over central banks today in repressive countries, this is exactly what they do. And how did Donald Trump try to do it? With a corrupt sham investigation into the Federal Reserve chair. So one win for the Defiance this week, Xander, at least, is a federal judge striking down those subpoenas and dealing maybe not a death blow, but a major blow to that sham criminal investigation into the Fed chair. I want to take us to the war with Iran before we bring in our guest. A lot happening there in the past 24 hours, a lot of developments. Within a single day, the Trump administration lifted sanctions on Russian oil, basically allowing our adversaries to make more money while they are allegedly collaborating with the Iranians to target our troops. We'll talk about that. 6 U.S. service members were killed in nearby Iraq on a flight, a refueling flight, and thousands of additional Marines are now being sent toward the region, sparking concerns that there will be, indeed, a ground war. We begin with the administration's attempt to manage the economic fallout. Late Thursday night, the Trump administration announced it would temporarily lift sanctions on Russian oil that had been stranded at sea. Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent said the move is meant to stabilize global energy markets as the war with Iran drives oil prices higher. And under the new policy, Russian oil already in transit can be sold on global markets. Officials estimate the move could release hundreds of millions of barrels of crude supply. Meanwhile, energy prices have surged since the United States started striking Iran late last month, driven largely by fears that Iran could disrupt shipping through the Strait of Hormuz. To offset that pressure, the administration is now allowing Russians to sell their oil on the markets, oil that was previously sanctioned, despite reports that Russia has been providing intelligence to Iran to help strike Western bases. Let's put that in a different way. We are helping our adversaries go sell products to make money while they are providing information that could get our soldiers killed. In fact, as of this moment, we don't know why that flight went down over Iraq. Perhaps it had to do with Russian targeting information. I don't know. Energy analysts estimate roughly 130 million barrels of oil, Russian oil, are currently sitting at sea. Critics, of course, say the move weakens years of sanctions imposed after Russia's invasion of Ukraine. European leaders have also raised concerns that easing pressure on Moscow during a global conflict could fracture the coalition that had been trying to isolate Russia. But the economic consequences are only part of the story tonight, because the human cost of this conflict is becoming clearer. The Pentagon confirmed Friday that 6 U.S. service members were killed when a military refueling aircraft crashed in western Iraq. The aircraft involved was a KC-135 Stratotanker, a key refueling plane used by the Air Force to support combat operations. According to U.S. Central Command, the crash occurred Thursday afternoon when the aircraft was operating in support of the Iran war mission. All 6 crew members on board were killed. Officials say the crash does not appear to have been caused by hostile fire, but the deaths bring the total number of U.S. personnel killed since the war began on February 28th to 12 service members and 13 total deaths, including a medical incident. Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth briefly acknowledged the deaths during a Pentagon press briefing Friday morning, calling the crew American heroes. But much of that briefing quickly shifted away from the crash and toward the administration's escalating attacks on the press. The White House and Pentagon spent much of Friday lashing out at CNN over reporting that suggested the administration may have underestimated Iran's willingness to disrupt shipping through the Strait of Hormuz. White House Press Secretary Caroline Leavitt called the report, quote, 100% fake news and garbage, insisting the Pentagon has been planning for the possibility for decades. At the Pentagon briefing, Hegseth went even further. During the press conference, the defense secretary mocked CNN's reporting and even suggested some production notes.
They're confused, and we know it. Our response? We will keep pressing. We will keep pushing, keep advancing. No quarter, no mercy for our enemies. Yet some in this crew, in the press, just can't stop. Allow me to make a few suggestions. People look up at the TV and they see banners, they see headlines. I used to be in that business, and I know that everything is written intentionally. For example, a banner or a headline, Mideast war intensifies, splashing on the screen the last couple of days, alongside visuals of civilian or energy targets that Iran has hit, because that's what they do. What should the banner read instead? How about Iran increasingly desperate? Because they are. They know it, and so do you, if it can be admitted. Or more fake news from CNN. Reports that the Trump administration underestimated the Iran war's impact on the Strait of Hormuz. Patently ridiculous, of course. For decades, Iran has threatened shipping in the Strait of Hormuz. This is always what they do, hold the strait hostage. CNN doesn't think we thought of that. It's a fundamentally unserious report. The sooner David Ellison takes over that network, the better.
A U.S. Defense Secretary opining about which billionaires should take over different American media outlets. Same Defense Secretary, by the way, who kicked major media outlets out of the Pentagon for their refusal to sign a non-disclosure agreement and to not basically do their jobs. The Pentagon also confirmed today that it is sending more American forces into the region. U.S. officials say a Marine Expeditionary Unit is now heading to the Middle East. The deployment includes roughly 2,200 Marines, 3 U.S. Navy amphibious warships, fighter jets, and transport aircraft. Officials say the deployment does not necessarily mean the Marines will be used in a ground invasion of Iran, but it does significantly expand the American military footprint in the region, and critics aren't buying it. I want to bring into the conversation former Pentagon correspondent and CNN reporter Barbara Starr, who has been tracking these issues very closely, has been tracking the war with Iran, and also my Defiance.org co-founder, Xander Schultz. Hi, Barbara. Welcome.
Hey, guys. How are you?
Good. Great to have you here. Barbara, I want to start at the top end and ask you about the deployment of the Marines to the region. I mean, this has sparked a lot of legitimate inquiry today over at the Pentagon about whether the United States is preparing to actually start a ground war here. I mean, mostly the attacks have been by air. It's certainly possible that there have been other covert on the ground elements. We haven't seen confirmation of that in the press, but this would be a very significant escalation if they were going to put U.S. Marines on the ground in Iran.
Yeah, I think it's worth sort of picking all this apart and looking at some of the details. So, troops on the ground. What does that actually mean inside Iran? If you have 2,200 Marines, they like to say they're expeditionary. That means, as you both know, they can go in, look after themselves, carry their own supplies, carry their own weapons, their own ammo, but not forever. It's a very limited ability to do that. So how would they get there? Maybe they could parachute in. It's not what they typically do necessarily. They typically go amphibious, meaning they dock somewhere and come in by land. But this is not friendly territory. So you're going to have a lot of overhead support and a lot of ground support. I mean, the minute they start moving, you have to start thinking about the next round of food, fuel, all the supplies that they need. So I'm not at all clear, that how it would work and what they would do. I mean, the big item still out there on the ground is any of Iran's nuclear material that the U.S. wants to seize. The Israelis might be better suited to doing it, U.S. Special Operations. Not sure the Marines are the ones you want.
Barbara, we saw Hegseth speaking there. You've been critical about the press purge that happened at the Pentagon after, being a journalist there for 20 years. Something that's on my mind that you're the perfect person to ask. What are we missing now that we would have had if that room was still filled with journalists? What's our big risk of that press purge in this moment?
Well, I think it's an interesting question. I think that what is missing is broader than just the press room and press conferences. Those tend to be very performative, even at the best of times. And if you'll allow me a diversion, and maybe we'll come back to it. When I say performative, my first impression is that Pete Hegseth was auditioning for David Ellison when he leaves the Pentagon and is looking for a new job. But that's just my opinion. So, yes, you may laugh. But
I'm laughing and agreeing with you. I hadn't even thought of that, but I'll be damned if that's not a good assessment.
Well, I don't know that Mr. Ellison appreciates Pete Hegseth getting into his business right now before the merger deal is closed and it's all signed, sealed, and delivered. These matters are very financially sensitive. I'm not sure he needs Pete Hegseth having his back, so to speak. I don't know. What are we missing? I think what we're missing is accountability. Reporters being able to be where the news is, ask questions, hold leadership to account. And that is exactly what Hegseth doesn't want. I mean, are you kidding me? We're in the middle of a war. People are dying on both sides. And he's worried about headlines. And he wants to rewrite the copy. I would think he'd be busier than that.
You would think, but it doesn't, from those press conferences, you don't get that sense. I mean, I was very struck, Barbara, by the fact that the U.S. service members who were killed got, very brief mention, but instead Hegseth has spent so much time going to war with the media. And, it's kind of the classic case of, thou dost protest too much. I mean, they say that all of this reporting is wrong, but they're so obsessed with the reporting that by all accounts seems right, that there was very little planning that went into this conflict. And I want to ask you about that. I don't know if you've heard from folks in the Pentagon. Certainly, it looks to me like the things any of us would have prepared for in government weren't done. I mean, I've been saying to folks without any joking or any, humor behind it, that we prepared for this when I was in grad school. When we did war games about geopolitics, we prepared for, if you went into Iran, the Strait of Hormuz would be closed. And how would that factor into your decisions? I mean, this is a international relations undergraduate students preparation, is to anticipate something like this. And yet it appears that the president, the NSC, and the Pentagon went in flat-footed, or at least dismissed concerns of the remaining folks inside of government, the civil servants who flagged those worries.
Well, I think that, the first thing is Hegseth's unending criticism of the media, and including today, and now we see the White House putting a statement out also criticizing CNN. Look, he wants to demonstrate to the president that he's part of the team, he's on board, he's leading the charge against the news media. So set that aside. What about all of this business of the Straits of Hormuz? Well, did you see where Hegseth said, so the problem really is that the Iranians, I'm paraphrasing, but not too far off, the Iranians are shooting at shipping. And if they weren't shooting at shipping, it would be perfectly safe to go through, and it will be when they stop shooting. So really, what a revelatory thought. But the minute Hegseth got done with answering that question, the chairman of the Joint Chiefs chimed in, and he very soberly said that they were still working on a plan to escort ships. It's very complex. It's something that they have to take some time to figure out. But if they anticipated it ahead of time, you would have thought they might have had it largely figured out by now. But the chairman says, hey, we're still working on it. We are, 13, 14 days into this. There are any number of tankers and cargo ships that are stuck there, and crews of civilian mariners. These folks work for not a lot of money. They come from all over the world to ride these cargo ships and man them around the globe, and they are stuck inside the Strait of Hormuz in the crosshairs. They are very nervous. They want to get out of there, but they can't because international insurance agencies simply are not going to insure the movement of these ships as long as this combat goes on.
Well, it's another thing, Barbara, even the suggestion that they can escort ships through the strait strikes me as people who are 20 years behind the times, because the worry is not, will a ship be intercepted? Will an oil ship and tanker be intercepted by an Iranian ship or boarded or shot at? Even if it's being escorted by U.S. ships, the worry is unconventional techniques being used. The worry is tiny aerial drones loaded with explosives. The worry is, small ski-doos loaded with explosives and autonomous boats. I mean, the concern is that we've got an aging U.S. fleet there that may be the best of what navies have had to offer, but what navies have had to offer doesn't meet the moment of asymmetric threats. And so that's why I've long suspected, or the past 2 weeks have suspected, that's why they're having so much trouble coming up with how do we actually escort these tankers through, because we aren't built to guard against those types of emerging threats. It's very, very hard to say that you're going to have the ability to take out little tiny, in some cases, almost untrackable drones laden with explosives that could go hit these very flammable, combustible giant tankers. I mean, these things are just sitting ducks. And, the response, of course, was, well, the administration is going to look to offer insurance coverage, and they're going to cover the insurance costs. Well, companies aren't going to go through. This is not they're worried about having to replace an expensive boat. They're worried about, as you said, people dying, civilian mariners dying. No insurance policy, however big, is going to lead them to go through that strait if they think those guys are going to be killed, especially with unconventional tactics. But in that same vein, Barbara, I want to ask you about another threat to U.S. forces in the region, which is that one of America's top geopolitical adversaries, the Russians, who have been developing a closer and closer relationship with the Iranians over the past 15 years, are now benefiting from a boon in oil prices. And on top of that boon in oil prices, we've just unloaded sanctions on the Russians and made it easier for them to go sell that oil. And we're finding out that, yes, indeed, they are providing intelligence to the Iranians to target Americans. Is it wrong to say we are effectively now paying our adversary to target our own troops?
Not too far a stretch, as far as I can see. It's sort of mind-boggling. I mean, I guess the administration's contention is this lifting of sanctions will be very brief. Perhaps a few months. But I think that what they are forgetting, for those of us, including everybody on you guys, who has covered combat for the last many decades, Trump and Hegseth might do well to remember, even if they don't want to acknowledge, there's two things that bring down a presidency and make it ineffective, even if the president remains in office. And that's, God forbid, dead troops coming home. The American people don't tolerate. Post-Vietnam, I would contend that the American people do not want to see dead troops coming home for a war that is not clearly explained, that has so little public support as this one does. And the other thing that makes a president ineffective in office is high fuel prices, high gasoline prices, home heating oil, fertilizer, all of the products that come through the Persian Gulf and are on these cargo ships that move around the world. And, it's an international market. A lot of those ships then head off to China and the Pacific Rim and Asia and unload their products in that market. But then you have shipping that comes out of parts of Europe, the Mediterranean, that would typically maybe go through the strait and now will go all the way around to Africa. That also makes prices go up. It's a world market. The world energy market is indeed a world market, and we are already seeing gas prices go up here. I think the president's going to find himself trying to figure out how to take all of that into account for his various policies.
Barbara, Miles and I were speaking this morning about how maybe Defiance can invest in investigative journalism to have maximum impact in thwarting authoritarianism. Everything from looking into the cost of the detention centers to this war. And I wonder, if I was to ask you that question, if we were to invest in journalism around this conflict, where do you think could be our best kind of bang for our buck in terms of making sure the public is properly attributing some of the pain or the catastrophe that they're experiencing and seeing to this administration? In the past, we've talked about the impact of, visuals of even children being harmed. You think about Napalm Girl in Vietnam, or more recently, what happened in Gaza. Is it photojournalism that gets back to the States? Is it the cost of things and the association between the conflict and the cost everyone's experiencing? I just want to throw that question to you in terms of what we can do.
Well, my initial instinct is it is imagery. I think that's how people process information most quickly these days. In Gaza, we saw tragically a number of Palestinian journalists killed in that conflict. A number of them, risked their lives terribly to try and get the images and the stories out of Gaza. Iran, in the same way, is going to continue to be very difficult to report from because of the regime in charge there. But if there's any way to get images out, interviews out, any of that, I think that resonates with people. There were some interviews with Iranian shopkeepers, and I've always struck in combat zones, it's the shopkeepers that I used to do this in Afghanistan. I would go interview shopkeepers. Those are the guys that know what's going on the street. They know who's there, who's not there. They can go out their front door onto the sidewalk from their shop, and they know who the strangers are. They know who the regime policemen are. They know everything that's going on. So if we could get somebody to go interview shopkeepers in the marketplaces of Tehran, I think that would be extraordinary. I think that we also are going to have to get more reporting out of the Gulf states that have been so badly attacked. Because, unless some of this shipping opens up, I think we all have to think about the fact freshwater, food supplies. Hard to believe you're saying this about these wealthy Gulf states, but they don't have their own freshwater supplies. Food is largely imported. If Iran were to, this is not an original thought by me. I've seen it everywhere. If Iran was suddenly to strike desalination plants, this would be beyond catastrophic. There would be, potentially a shortage of water in the region. So there's a long way to go. And it's the images, I think, of all of these things that are so compelling.
Yeah, I've got to say, Barbara, it is sort of an oddity when war breaks out, and you certainly covered this in Iraq and Afghanistan. So many people chase the ball. You don't even worry about, do we have enough coverage of the war? But I have felt like we are in this very unusual circumstance where there are so many angles to this that haven't been covered because news organizations are stretched so thin by the sheer volume of things this administration is doing. I mean, when I talk to friends who are at some of the major networks, they say, I can't even cover a tenth of the stories on my beat, let alone get reassigned to go cover aspects related to the war. I mean, there's a lot that's being missed here. So it's something that we'll look forward to continuing to get your thoughts on is where should there be additional attention and what are some of the good organizations in independent media we can go support to make sure that we're looking into those aspects. Barbara, go ahead.
No, I think that's great. And we all want to be careful. We learned this lesson very sadly in Syria, Iraq, and Afghanistan. The independent media that is on the ground, God bless them, they'll risk their lives to get the stories out, but we don't want them to do that. So it's a matter of also providing the tools to these folks that will help keep them safe. That's going to be very important.
Well, says someone who has risked her own to go get the story and has risked her career and has risked her rights. And Barbara Starr, we're very grateful for everything that you've done and you continue to do, my friend. I hope you will join us to continue to shed light on this evolving conflict. And it doesn't look like anytime soon we're going to need to stand down on this one.
It's been great chatting with you guys.
Incredible, Barbara Starr. Thank you for being with us, my friend.
Thanks, guys.
Well, Xander, we go now to our favorite part of the program every day, usually a more lighthearted part of the program, which is an answer to the question, who is joining the Defiance? And as all of this madness that we were talking with Barbara about continues to swirl, there is one overwhelming truth that everyday life has to go on. We still have to pay bills. You and I have still got to go take care of our little ones and go grocery shopping and on and on. But sometimes those two things can bleed together. And for one content creator who usually focuses on home development, there was a reason to combine the two things, everyday life and the chaos of the moment. Here is Lehigh Valley Workshop teaching viewers how to build a bathroom vanity while calling out the White House on another endless war and how it is affecting Americans.
So I think it finally happened. I think we forgot 9/11. And not in that early aughts Toby Keith Islamophobia way, but like in actually understanding why it happened. Because if we did understand why it happened, and I should rephrase that, if we gave a shit about why it happened, then we wouldn't be pulling colonialist Groundhog Day in Iran right now. And I wouldn't be watching another generation of kids in the Middle East becoming radicalized because American bombs are killing their families while Pete Hegseth cosplays desktop Rambo. And it's blatantly clear to anyone not drenched in red, white, and blue propaganda that the reason we're bombing the shit out of Iran is basically because, one, we're utterly beholden to the whims of Israel, and two, our president is an incompetent narcissist desperately clinging to power but being so inept that everything he touches turns to shit. So as a way to distract from his domestic failures and that whole he's implicated in child rape thing, he thinks the best way to assert dominance is by sending American troops to die in the Middle East. And of course it's already falling apart. Did you really think the guy that tried to sell steaks with his name on them, the guy that bankrupted every business he touched, the guy who spends more time in a courtroom than a fucking judge was going to be able to pull off a complex war in the Middle East? All these fucksticks that voted for this fleshy pile of hatred incarnate are getting kicked square in the dick because their minds were turned into liquid slop by decades of Republican propaganda. I fucking hate this timeline. And people keep projecting onto this imbecile a level of competence he clearly does not have. I want to pull my fucking hair out every time I see a post saying that this war is an excuse to cancel the midterms or institute martial law or drop a nuclear bomb or some other disaster scenario. I don't know how many times I have to say this, but he as an administration are far too fucking stupid to orchestrate a plan of that magnitude. I don't think Trump could find his asshole with two hands and a flashlight. Trump and his merry band of incels are the most immature and incompetent people to ever disgrace the halls of the White House. Since taking office, our economy is shit, our jobs are shit, our reputation around the world is shit, our faith in government is shit, our national security is shit. By every meaningful metric, our entire country is a big old pile of shit, and this war in Iran is the latest shit in an unending series of heinous shits. So please stop giving these people a level of competence they clearly do not possess. Everyone is so worried about us sliding into fascism and becoming Germany in the 30s. Look at his approval rating. Find me one thinking person that supports what he's doing. The only trains this motherfucker is making run on time are the toy ones his handlers let him play with. Our adversary is not the banal evil of this man as much as it is his incompetence and willingness to burn the world so he never has to face consequences.
Yeah, that was actually very fun. That's a nice way to receive the news, guys.
Xander,
with those visuals.
I gotta know, did you learn how to build a vanity?
No, but I was thinking about what I could be doing while we're doing our news program while it's going on. It helped. Like there was something about it that my ADD really appreciated. Yeah, man. Well, I mean, look, like the not forgetting 9/11 thing. What's more frustrating is we just pulled out of Afghanistan like 2023. Like forget 25 years ago. 1 or 2 years ago, we just pulled out of Afghanistan and the Taliban immediately retook it. We just got out of a 20-year freaking plus mess. And so this is all fresh on our mind, how these stories end, how poorly, much smarter people than Trump and his leaders are at regime change of any type. And the only thing I do want to say, because this is like there's like this draw, and I totally get it, to distribute your anger at what's going on, not just to Trump, but to his followers. There's this toxic draw to assume that everyone that's supporting Trump likes what's going on. And it's funny because he went around and mentioned it's actually completely unpopular what he's doing. And so we need to remember that most of the 80 million people that voted for Trump had a bugaboo issue in this country. One of them being no more forever wars, right? That was one of the mandates he was elected on, was no more forever wars. Had a bunch of legitimate gripes about what was going on that were totally serviced by either political party. And so I want to make sure to keep the anger focused at Trump and these fucking grifters that sold a bunch of people a bag of goods that they had no intention on delivering on. And remember that most of our countrymen, have real issues. We have a middle class that's completely collapsed. We have people that have dealt with the impact of globalization. We have people that have dealt with the global war on terror and the PTSD that came with that service without a clear, goal associated with it. We have people who have dealt with the kind of loss of antitrust laws that have allowed these monopolies to be created in our country in every sector. And so I just want to make sure we keep that in mind. Don't lose that, because those are people that have real gripes and we can have real solutions for, and we can win, and we should, and we need to win them. And keep that anger focused on Trump and the lies he spread and the propaganda that allowed him to take this office.
Hear, hear, my friend. Hear, hear. And I would also say if Shop Class had been that funny and R-rated at my high school, I would have signed up for Shop Class.
Yeah.
I think you would be a really good candidate to join Lehigh Valley's.
Maybe this new rural Oregon version of me, a previous version of me, would not have been a great shop class teacher at all my metropolitan accent.
Well, the answer, of course, today to who is joining the Defiance is the Lehigh Valley Workshop for that hilarious, compelling, crude, and quite timely video showing us how to build a vanity in this moment. Xander, let's take Let's take a few viewer questions before we jump. I'm going to throw the first one at you from Herman Jacobs. Question: what can Trump do to get himself off this Iranian issue? I don't see a way out for him short of going nuclear, literally, which isn't beyond the realm of possibility for this depraved president. Xander, did you find a way out for him?
No. No, I did not find a way out for him, other than Trump, because he has no care whatsoever for anyone else's well-being, might say, I'm done with this conflict, and leave Iran in ashes and leave us vulnerable to, counterattacks and terrorist attacks, whatever you want to call it. So, I could see Trump totally claiming a win and walking away irresponsibly from a disaster and, region destabilizing act that he caused. I could see that. I don't see a way for him to somehow leave Iran in better shape than they were, leave America in better shape than they were before this crisis. Nor do I think that was the point. We talked about this earlier on our coffee. I think we're seeing a clear pattern from Trump, whether it's Iran is almost like the Minneapolis. It is his go create chaos, try to foment a violent response, use that violent response to take emergency powers, and use those emergency powers to have more and more authoritarian powers and consolidating powers. And so that's what's happening here. That's the goal. I think it's pretty clear that's what the goal is. He didn't get in Minneapolis. He got his hand slapped. The Republicans in his party even told him to back down as they were losing support in the midterms. And, we'll see how this goes. I imagine it's going to be fucking more of the same. It's a deeply unpopular conflict.
A deeply, deeply unpopular conflict. I mean, look, if I was still in the administration, Xander, I would say that the way out is Donald Trump right now needs to find a way to end the conflict, propose a ceasefire in exchange for the Iranians agreeing to engage in a ceasefire, not attacking the U.S. homeland, not attacking forces in the region, and go to the negotiating table on Iran's future role in the region. That's it. Stop now. Because the further we go into this, the worse the economic costs, the likelier the severe retaliation, including here in the U.S. homeland. If it hasn't happened already, we've already seen either inspired or directed potential terrorist attacks in Texas, Michigan, Virginia, still being investigated. But at least the attack in Texas seems directly tied to the conflict, if not the other two. This is getting very serious, very fast. And, we mentioned nuclear weapons. Who was it that asked, who made that question? Herman Jacobs, you alluded to nuclear weapons there. That's not facetious. I wrote about in our piece today on defiance.news the worry that we had in the first term of Donald Trump getting us into a nuclear war. This man has a personal, almost clinical fascination with nuclear bombs. I just want to remind people of this. In the first term, Donald Trump talked to senior staff about the possibility of using nuclear weapons in a conflict. He proposed the idea of using a nuclear bomb, but blaming it on another country, right? He asked staff, could we maybe set off a nuclear bomb and blame it on someone else? He talked frequently about new nuclear weapons. When he left the White House, I will remind you, Jack Smith and his investigators found he stole classified documents about nuclear weapons. And when he came back into the White House, One of the things he said last year, he directed the Pentagon to resume testing nuclear weapons for the first time since the Cold War. There's a reason we haven't been testing physical nuclear weapons since the Cold War. It encourages other countries to proliferate nuclear weapons. It starts a competition between powers to expand their nuclear stockpiles. It destabilizes the nuclear situation in the world. And Donald Trump, amidst all of this, has directed his Pentagon, please resume blowing up nuclear bombs. This is a very, very dangerous moment. And Herman, I'm glad you flagged that because, of course, also the Iranians possess the fissile material for 11 nuclear weapons. And Donald Trump's own envoy says that they could relatively quickly assemble World War II-like devices of the same caliber that we dropped on Japan during the Second World War, and that if not that, they have the fissile material to make a dirty bomb. Those were Steve Witkoff's words, not mine. That's extremely serious. This is something that could become a radiological conflict.
If only there was some sort of nuclear deal we could have reached diplomatically with this nation before diving into war. Or maybe there would be a secondary institution, like a United Nations of sort, to come together to resolve these issues. Like the fuck, we blew up this is what Trump does. He like blows up all the infrastructure, then he rebuilds like the shittiest version of it in his name and calls it a win.
Yes. Like his fake UN, the Board of Peace.
Yeah, the Board of Peace.
He blows up the United Nations. He's like, yeah, but I'm going to create this other cool little club that has no accountability, and everyone just gives me cash, and it's smaller and it's less influential, but it's got my name on it.
It's got my name on it. I'm running it now. Fucking hell, dude. There's a reason we built all these things. And in some ways, like, this is an important history lesson because what we gave to the UN, what we give to USAID, it is easy if you're going on like a 60-year run of peace, Miles, where you are wondering, is that money well spent? Do we really have to fund the whole world? Do we have to overinvest in the development of nations? I get how you get to questioning those fucking things, but now we're seeing why. Because the alternative is really expensive. War with other nations is expensive. Trying to do everything by force in this Machiavellian way is really expensive and challenging and horrific and terrible. I don't want to lose the human cost of life in all this. So yeah, it sucks. It sucks that we kind of blew up the kind of senior thesis project, and now we have like the kindergarten version of everything, replacing it with Trump's name on it.
But to continue with that analogy, you could just walk over to shop class and hear the truth.
Yeah, you should go see a good shop teacher.
Danny asks, when's the last time Trump talked about housing costs, getting a house, healthcare, our lives, any SNAP, childcare costs, groceries, necessities? Actually, Danny, I'm going to correct you. He did talk about those things yesterday. Yesterday, he said he doesn't want housing prices to be lower. He wants housing prices to go up. That's what Donald Trump wants to do. In fact, as the Democrats were working on legislation with some people across the aisle on Capitol Hill to try to incentivize affordable housing and to make housing more affordable for people around the country. That was Donald Trump's comment. He said, I don't want housing to be cheaper. I want it to be more expensive. So there you go. There's a man who's really in touch with the needs
50-year mortgages.
Americans. That's right. 50-year mortgages. Xander, I'm going to take the last question here and throw it your way because our good friend, the incredible Kenneth Gilbert, who also sports one of these fantastic hats, said, Xander, have any politicos endorsed your platform? I assume Kenneth means that political platform that Xander laid out there. I don't know if that's what you meant, Kenneth. Maybe you also meant, is Xander running for public office? Is Xander running for president? Is he announcing that today? Xander, are you running for president of the United States?
I'm so happy you mentioned this. Play that dramatic patriotic music real quick.
Dun, 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 dun.
No, I think what
Schultz 2028.
I publish. Yeah, the hat says something different when I turn around. I think what Kenneth mentions is I'm kind of in the beginning stages. I wrote something earlier this week on trying to find a widely agreed upon anti-corruption platform that politicos from across the spectrum, and when I say politicos, I don't mean elected officials yet. I mean political thinkers from across the spectrum co-sign and then bring to market as a mandate for politicians to sign. And if they don't sign it, and I'm talking about, term limits, I'm talking about dark money, and asking politicians to do two things. One, prioritize it as law, and two, to personally, even before it becomes law, abide by these anti-corruption policies and be open to kind of transparency practices to make sure they're abiding by them. I'd love to create something like this. I think anti-corruption is the thing that can bring us all together, and might be kind of, there's no silver bullets, but might be the closest thing to a silver bullet that gets us out of all the ways, our different industries and sectors are being corrupted. And so I'm early innings. I haven't brought that to any politicos. I'm still developing the platform. I'd love to develop it in public, just talking to people from across the spectrum. Would love to talk to everyone from my friend Alicia Garza, who's co-founder of BLM, to Tucker Carlson, and see what we can all agree upon, and then put that forward to politicians to either endorse or receive some sort of scarlet letter that they are not willing to take themselves out of this corrupt game and build a Washington that's really representative of the people. But very early, that's not even a Defiance project yet. Very early in my thinking, I do everything out loud. I think out loud. I try, and so.
Me and our producer were sitting here thinking, yeah, we're not going to have Tucker Carlson on this program, so Xander's going to have to go do that on his own.
I'm going to do it on my own.
Mercedes wipes her brow. She's like, woo! One thing I will say, Xander, you and I were talking about this earlier today, and just some of your political thinking in that space, and as a very jaded, Washington type, I needled you about that being utopian, but I've got to say, maybe in this moment of dystopia, utopia is the antidote that we need. Yeah. So it's something to think about. But in general,
hey, look, I'm a serial entrepreneur, so it won't be the first time I fell on my face if it doesn't work.
Well, no,
out.
the anti-corruption measures should really be one of the most unifying things. I mean, right now they should be, but I'm under no illusions that in this moment we're going to reach political accord on anything. But certainly, as the political opposition reclaims power in the United States, that's going to be the focus. How do we stop this from happening again? How do we keep someone from taking public office and abusing the power to enrich themselves, to go after their enemies, to expand their legacy? That's not what government's meant to do. And clearly our system was not built for this moment. We didn't have the right laws in place. And I'll say, Democrats missed a major opportunity after Donald Trump left in 2020, a major opportunity. They put forward a piece of legislation called H.R. 1, not 2 or 3. It was the first bill introduced on the House floor to make sweeping reforms across the government to prepare for and protect democracy if someone like Donald Trump came back again. The bill was never passed, and someone like Donald Trump did come back again. His name was Donald Trump.
Yeah, it's so true. Yeah. That was a heartbreak. We worked on HR 1. That was a heartbreak. That would have been amazing. And honestly, a lot of, especially the Black and brown, communities that I worked with in the 2020 election, felt heartbroken that wasn't prioritized earlier in that kind of 2-year window where Democrats had control of the House, Senate, and the presidency.
Yeah, I'll say one last thing, Xander, before we round off for the weekend. Is we had someone in the chat mentioned that their Trump-supporting father is listening to the program, and to please share something that can make him open his eyes. Look, I would just say this, sir. I've been a lifelong Republican. I'm not a Democrat now. I remain a conservative. I'm no longer in the Republican Party. But I will just tell you this. I don't blame the 77 million Americans who voted for Donald Trump for everything that's happening. But what I will say is, if people don't open their eyes, then history will blame them for what's happening, because the man is not making decisions in your interest or our interest. He's making it in his own self-interest. And that's not words coming from the mouth of someone who's a Democrat in sheep's clothing. I say that as a rock-ribbed conservative who wants to see a more accountable government, a smaller government, a government that gets out of the lives of Americans, a government that promotes American values. We have a president that has undermined all of the values of conservatism. Conservatives used to believe in free minds, free markets, and free people. And Donald Trump has assiduously tried to censor free speech. He has tried to destroy free markets by being protectionist, by shutting down America's relationships with the world, by doing what Republicans said they would never do, slapping tariffs, which are just taxes on everything, making our lives more expensive. And as far as free people, Donald Trump has abandoned our allies, the people that are supposed to be protecting us, the people who are supposed to be with us in war, and he's bear hugging our enemies. And that's something I can never forgive him for as a conservative, is watching this man. Even look at the decision we mentioned today that Trump made to allow the Russians our mortal enemies, the Russian regime, to make money while they are targeting American troops. This isn't a conspiracy theory. It's not a lie. It's not a mainstream media gimmick. The President of the United States knows that in lifting sanctions, he's going to enrich the same people who are providing information to get our service members killed. I would say that's not only wrong, I would say it's traitorous to its absolute core. That's the President of the United States. He is not a conservative. He's hardly an American. And that's something I saw firsthand. I wanted him to succeed. I wanted him to deviate from the vile rhetoric that I saw on the campaign trail and settle into the presidency and govern like a conservative, but more than that, govern like an American who cares about American interests. That's not what happened, and that's not what has happened. And I would say it is never too late to do the right thing and to wake up. And I say that as someone who still wants whoever is in the Oval Office to succeed. But I've lost hope that this man will. And I think the only hope is that we make sure he gets out of there as soon as possible and we restore dignity in our politics and we restore the rule of law. So that's what I would say. Xander, let's head into the weekend with a note of optimism. We've got some wonderful announcements next week. Join us, as always, folks, next Wednesday at 5 p.m. Eastern. Those are when we announce our weekly missions to protect the rule of law in this country. Remember, Xander Schultz is a socialist. Miles Taylor is a conservative. None of that shit matters, because right now what we are literally talking about is how do we protect the United States Constitution in this moment where there continues to be violations of it, in this moment where federal judges appointed by presidents of all parties continue to say there are violations of the Constitution. That's what we're focused on. And next week, we're going to be talking about countering one of those abuses of power with a terrific announcement. In fact, I think we've got 2 announcements next week, so stay tuned. Mm-hmm. And of course, as always, Xander, folks can join us at what time every weekday?
2 p.m. Pacific. No, violates when I talk about
you Pacific people. Look, I know we've got a lot of people in California, but us East Coasters laugh so much when you guys talk about Pacific time. Pacific time, it's so quaint. Join us at 2 p.m. Pacific, 5 p.m. Eastern every single weekday. Friends, have a wonderful weekend. We will see you Monday. In the meantime, stay loud, stay brave, and stay together.